I won't be cheering, but not out of sympathy for Michael Kimmel. And that's my subject on today's Fiamengo File. I'm Janice Fiamengo of the University of Ottawa. Most of us by now have had some experience of Me Too. A friend, a neighbor's son, a coworker, or a loved one is suddenly accused of sexual misconduct, and now he's suspended from his job pending an investigation, or he's flat out fired, or he's walking around under a cloud, desperately hoping that another woman doesn't put the final nail in his coffin. And this is the brave new world we're all supposed to celebrate in the name of gender equality. But now, some feminist icons are being fingered too. Weinstein accuser Asia Argento accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old boy. Professor Avital Ronell for sexually harassing her male graduate student. And perhaps most sensationally, Professor Michael Kimmel, director of the Center for the Study of Men and Masculinities at Stony Brook University in New York, the ultimate male man-shamer, accused of sexual harassment by various former students, one of whom has come forward to accuse him under her own name. It looks like big-time karma. Kimmel is the man who preached to men about being allies to women when they accuse other men, and who has had the gall to claim that he knows better than working-class white men what and whom they should be angry at. His main shtick is repeating cliches about race, sexuality, and gender, in which he always singles out straight white men for their toxic masculinity.
The chief obstacle to racial equality has been the behavior and attitudes of white people. The chief obstacles to sexual equality has been the behavior and attitudes of heterosexuals. And of course, the chief obstacles to gender equality have been the behavior and attitudes of men.
And this is the man who's made a career of telling untruths about men's rights activists, claiming, for example, famously, that MRAs use the fact of gender symmetry in domestic violence to conclude there should be no domestic violence shelters for women at all, an argument no MRA has ever made.
Let's grant every single empirical case as being true. Yes, it is true. Let's just say, it is not true, but let's just assume that there is gender symmetry in domestic violence, that women hit men as much as men hit women. If I were to say that, I would say, and therefore we need boatloads more funding for domestic violence to develop shelters and adequate interventions, because there's this hidden epidemic of men who are being beaten up by women. Or I could say, as the men's rights movement do, therefore we shouldn't have these shelters and we shouldn't fund them because the women are all lying. Well, it seems to me that if you really believe in gender symmetry, it's not that you want to, you're not questioning the number of women. You're just saying the number of men in society. You would want to join with women who are anti-violence to say, we have a real problem here. You know, it's not even a gender problem. It's a problem of women hitting men and men hitting women. We've got to get boatloads more funding. Let's work together. That seems the logical response to this. But instead, they're saying it's like a zero-sum game. If we fund the women, then we're going to ignore the men.
It's nearly impossible then not to feel a bitter satisfaction as those like Kimmel, who rode the waves of anti-male self-righteousness, now find themselves smashed on the rocks of public opprobrium. Just a few months ago, he was being fawningly interviewed in the feminist journal Signs. Now the internet is alive with sermonizing about what Kimmel must do in order to redeem himself. But this is not a development to be celebrated, and it is definitely not, in my opinion, the beginning of the end of Me Too, as some have hoped. Michael Kimmel isn't being criticized for misrepresenting men's issues or smearing men's advocates. He's being taken down as part of the next phase of a movement of mass vengeance in which many of us will be called to account, not only for our alleged misdemeanors, but simply for being in the path of a mob. Anyone who has ever believed that Me Too is about specific acts of sexual misconduct need merely read the long and helpfully detailed list of allegations against Kimmel by a former graduate student to see the thoroughly narcissistic and delusional nature of the Me Too scapegoating monster. And this monster will continue to grow despite its evident hypocrisies, because exponential growth is part of its DNA. The former graduate student is Bethany Costin, now a professor of gender, sexuality, and women's studies at Virginia Commonwealth University. And she has published a melodramatic itemizing of the campaign of terror Kimmel supposedly conducted against her. It's called Reclaiming My Fear, I Will No Longer Stay Silent, about Michael Kimmel. From the title alone, we know we're in the company of a writer whose thinking is controlled by slogans. Feminist literature is full of women reclaiming all sorts of things: their bodies, their lives, their power. And the fact that reclaiming power, for example, and reclaiming fear can be used to mean almost exactly the same thing in a feminist title indicates the essential meaninglessness of the phrasing. Early on in the article, Costin tells us that she is, quote, called in to this conversation by the brave anonymous sources who spoke truth to their experience of sexual harassment, end quote. Yeah, well, I was, quote, called in to make this video, albeit belatedly, by the pure tripe of finding anonymous accusations brave. Overall, Costin's allegations are trivial by any standard, and they have nothing to do with Kimmel's relentless demonization of men. What bothers Costin are the ways Kimmel failed to fall in line with her superior and even more rigid and punitive intersectional feminist ideology. According to Costin, Professor Kimmel profited from and exploited, she claims, her research assistants during the time she was his graduate student, but failed to fully grasp and acknowledge her superior insights about lesbian sexuality, transgenderism, and second-wave feminism. The worst she can say about him in the article is that he had her photocopy articles for him and look things up that he could have looked up himself. What did she expect? He was a big-time academic, proud to hobnob with the likes of Jane Fonda and Gloria Steinem, and she was a lowly graduate student getting a chance to make her mark on academia and exploiting Kimmel's patronage for all it was worth. She seems to have done well by it. Reading through Costin's list of Kimmel's so-called misconduct almost but not quite, makes one feel sorry for Kimmel. Apparently, he admitted to being uncomfortable using they-them pronouns for individual students. He didn't accept Costin's expanded definition of lesbian sex, which would have made it possible to claim that lesbians are equally sexually active as gay men. He confessed to shameful heterosexual impulses, and he failed to keep up with transgenderism's ever-changing terminology. Perhaps Professor Kimmel did all the unremarkable things Bethany Costin says he did and will now be tainted by her allegations. Is this karma for Kimmel? Only if it had anything to do with the real harm Kimmel has caused, and it doesn't. Bethany Costin is a vivid symbol of Me Too's manic momentum. She alleges that Kimmel lacked empathy for those with different values or experiences from his own, but she spectacularly lacks empathy for anyone who might deviate from the suffocatingly narrow range of opinion she deems acceptable which is even more self-righteous and priggish than Kimmel's. Her article expresses zero concern for the mostly male bodies that already litter the revolutionary feminist battleground. She simply wants to expand the scope of the slaughter and have us all on our knees begging for forgiveness. My point is, yes, it's satisfying to see